What's poppin', niggas and niggettes and non-niggas and non-niggettes? It's your boy Bread Pill Black, and I just want to say happy 4th of July. Today we celebrate when the Americans fought the British Empire to avoid paying taxes and freedom, for and owning white men. Today we will talk about something integral to America in this video, and it's one of its most essential values, white supremacy. Many people are unaware of what white supremacy is, and in this video I will explain what white supremacy is and the tiers of being a white supremacist. Before I start this video, I have to say this, and I can't stress this enough. I do not hate white people. If you're so fragile, you see someone talking about why white supremacy is bad, and you start frothing at the mouth. That is not my fucking problem. Stop being salty. This video was inspired by one of my favorite YouTubers, Politidice. Sadly, he doesn't post anymore. I saw he doesn't have his white supremacy tier list video, so I figured I'd make a bigger, better, blacker version of it. I've already discussed racism in a previous video, so I'm going to elaborate on what white supremacy is instead. To talk about white supremacy, we must define what whiteness is. As defined by Delgado and Stefanik in CRT 3rd edition, whiteness is qualities pertaining to Euro-American or Caucasian people or traditions. Whiteness is property is the notion that whiteness itself has value for its possessor and conveys a host of privileges and benefits. These privileges and benefits are detailed in this fact sheet I will link in the description below. Whiteness maintains itself in cultures through power dynamics within language, religion, class, race relations, sexual orientation, etc. Whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal and reinforces the racial order in which we live. That racial order has a name: white supremacy. White supremacy is the attitudes, ideologies, and policies associated with the rise of blatant forms of white or European dominance over non-white populations. To elaborate on it even more, white supremacy describes a social, political, economic system of domination based on racial categories that benefits those defined and perceived as white. This system of structural power privileges, centralizes, and elevates white people as a group. Sociologists and those involved in current racial justice movements, however, white supremacy is a descriptive and useful term to capture the all-encompassing centrality and assumed superiority of people defined and perceived as white, and the practices based on this assumption. White supremacy in this context does not refer to individual white people and their intentions or actions, but to an overarching political, economic, and social system of dominance. Again, racism is a structure, not an event. Many people tend to think of white supremacy as represented by extremists such as the Ku Klux Klan or the Nazi regime. This reductive definition obscures the reality of the larger system at work and prevents us from addressing the system. The truth is that white supremacy is not something you can isolate among far-right radicals or overt racists or conservatives. Instead, white supremacy, the dominance of people socially defined as white, is systematically maintained by hundreds of millions of ordinary people in everyday institutional practices that protect the racial order. It's not something imaginary. It is a problem that the US government and even the UN acknowledge. Whether you admit it or not, we live under the system of white supremacy, an inherently racist system. Whatever one calls it, it is pervasive and ever-evolving. It could be overt and covert. It can be something as severe as lynching, racist jokes, blackface, saying all lives matter, spouting MAGA, to denying racism unless it's against whites. If you're a white supremacist, you're a racist. Having a person of color girlfriend, boyfriend, child does not change that. You could be non-white and still be a white supremacist. And yes, I understand how paradoxical that sounds. Systemic racism is white supremacist laws in action. The remainder of this video will be defining the type of racist, and that is overt, covert, and enabler, and I will be using white supremacist and racist interchangeably. Also, if you say that racism, racist, white supremacist lost its meaning because it's overused, odds are you're just one of those things and you're saying that to downplay it. So when you're being called that, you can say, oh, this means nothing anymore, when in reality it still does. Now, what are the tiers for white supremacy? Let's get it! The overt racist white supremacists are the easiest ones to spot. Some do not care if people know that they are racist and are in fact proud of it, like David Duke, Rush Limbaugh, the alt-right, the people who go out to events yelling Jews will not replace us. Others fit in the overt racist category as well, but they are smart enough to know that labeling yourself as such is terrible optics, though they go the route of calling themselves white identitarians like Richard Spencer, Stefan Mountain, Tucker Carlson. On social media, they usually have Confederate flags, the imagery of crusades, anime profile pics, White Lives Matter, Nazi references, and more. These people believe in the superiority of an or exclusive identity for white people, advocate for a white ethno-state, remove all minorities, or create a separate nation for whites only. Uses ethnic slurs and knows various amount of them, like nigger, octoroon, mulatto, chink, kike, etc. Believe that socioeconomic disparities result from biological differences. An example is that the reason black people don't do well is that they are biologically violent and have low IQs. They overtly portray immigrants and refugees as dangerous pathogens or invaders. Example is Ben Garrison. Stone Toss, Tucker Carlson. May say that I'm not racist, then say some racist shit. Has an unreasonable bar for what they consider racist, unless it's against white people. They'll cry hard for that. Believe in and promote conspiracy theories about white genocide and anti-racist as anti-white. Justifies overt racism or even violent hate crimes in some cases. Example, Dylan Roof. They believe in race realism, the belief that black people are at the bottom of the racial hierarchy for genetic reasons and white people are on top. An example of this is JF. Uses extreme reactionary language and analysis and believes in conspiracy theories like the Holocaust never happened or cultural Marxism. They are the group most associated with white supremacy. They are admittedly, due to their size, the least threatening, but those radicalized at this point are known to perform acts of stochastic terrorism and also get more people to join their side because they're normally charismatic to an extent. There's really no chance of having an honest discourse with these people. Most, if not all, that they believe is false, have no basis in reality, debunked multiple times, and misconstrued because many do not understand how to read or interpret data and lack a sense of context or nuance. These people are usually fascist and far right. They are perpetual bad faith actors. They are experts at dog whistles, which in politics is the use of coded or suggestive language in political messaging to garner support from a particular group without provoking opposition, but refrain from using them. They try to appear normal in an attempt to hide behind a veneer of civility, but it does not take much for them to lose control and expose their true colors. Covert. Covert racists are more subtle with their racism and bigotry. They are the I'm not racist, but type of people. They mostly believe what the overt racists do, but not to an extreme amount. They care way more about optics as well. They're usually more palatable to the masses than their more overt counterparts. Covert racists would be like Ben Shapiro, Sargon of Akkad, Milo Yiannopoulos, Steven Crowder, Brandon Tatum, Candace Owens. They're usually conservative, but also hide behind classical liberals and libertarian values or labels. You can be a subtle racist and not be white, but the vast majority are, at least in America and Western countries. On social media, they can appear normal, along with anime profile pics. These are the signs of a subtle racist. Use dog whistles instead of overt racist language, states' rights, MAGA. Constantly use the same talking points as overt racists, but in a way that can appeal to a larger audience. An example, an overt racist would say blacks are violent and lazy, but a subtle one would just say black culture is bad. Claim that immigrants are destroying Western civilization instead of committing white genocide. Tucker Carlson said immigrants are making this country dirty. If a member of a minority group commits a crime, devote an absurd amount of time and attention to it, compared to what you would do to somebody who was naturally born. When that white kid was murdered and they were saying chant his name, instead of George Floyd. Heavily side with people on the alt-right but will deny when confronted. An example of this was JonTron. He repeated 13, 15 other white supremacist rhetoric and hung out with Milo and Sargon, like Steve King, but denies he has any ties to the alt-right or racism. Decry the end of free speech if a racist is denied a public platform, then campaign for your opposition to be fired. Example, Trump being deplatformed and conservatives wanting social media to get rid of the leftists, like they already don't do that already. Call for the banning or deportation of minority groups, but fiercely deny any connection to race. Example is the Muslim ban by Trump and conservatives saying, no, he's not doing this because he's a bigot, but because Obama did it, despite Trump saying he wants to ban Muslims when he began his presidential bid. Portray minority groups as thugs, rapists, and sympathetic to terrorism. Example, how people see Black Lives Matter and paint them as violent thugs who just want to hurt America, white people. Directly defend hate groups and portray bigots as being unfairly slandered. An example of this are people saying Trump isn't racist, it's just the liberal media making you think so, despite all the evidence showing otherwise. Proud Boys aren't a white supremacist group, they just like the West, you know? Write, spread, and reference fake news stories meant to demonize minority groups. Example, Paul Joseph Watson and Ben Shapiro. Flirt with overt racism and racists, but claim that people overreacting to jokes are being unfair, and decry SJWs and PC culture for making things not funny anymore. Steven Crowder and his comedy. In short, these people are more socially accepted than overt racists and have better protection in them from criticism. These people have already picked their side when it comes to racism and other forms of bigotry in the fight against white supremacy. These people are usually homophobic, transphobic as well, and reactionary, and base their politics on being anti-woke. They provide a mask for their racism, and it does not take much for them to go mask off. They are accepting of people of different backgrounds, but only if they agree with them. They will say facts don't care about their feelings, but just like the overt racists, can't argue their positions worth a damn, especially when facts go against their feelings. Enablers, accomplices, centrists, moderates. These people essentially enable the subtle and overt racists. They will always come to these people's aid and attempt to give them plausible deniability for what they say. They do not understand dog whistles as they always miss them and take what people say at face value. This is the most diverse group of racists, and many don't even understand how they are. They don't understand that excusing and downplaying racism only helps the racist. They unironically think racism is over, and if they see it as an individual issue, they think being colorblind is a good thing. They don't hold strong beliefs, but they have picked their side in the fight against white supremacy, and they are accomplices. They believe, may or may not hold racial prejudice, but pander to those who do. Ben Shapiro isn't racist, he just uses facts as an example of this. Unconditionally deny systemic racism, but go silent and excuse overt racism. Example, systemic racism isn't real, but build a wall to keep the Mexicans out. But they won't understand how that's racist. Concede that systemic racism existed, but ended in the 1960s, and when affirmative action happened, with no legacy whatsoever. Concede that systemic racism existed, but ended in the 1960s. Example, systemic racism used to be real, but now we are all equal under the law. You know, with their dumbass colorblind way of thinking. Portray white supremacy and social justice as equivalent, yet devote 90% of their time and energy attacking social justice. Example, centrists who pretend they aren't conservatives, but are, and they just dislike the left because the left actually cares about not offending people. They ignore or reference fake news stories from bigots, painstakingly debunk exaggerated stories from the left. Example, every skeptic YouTuber ever. They mock SJWs for getting triggered, then go on 20-minute rants about any form of media promoting social justice. Example, The Quartering, a YouTuber with 1 million subscribers, get upset at She-Ra for not being sexy or straight enough. Blame minorities for any social injustice, then advocate for policies that will worsen social justice. Example, your average conservative and neoliberal. They're not necessarily bad people, but they have chosen to support white supremacy and racism. For example, your racist uncle with a black girlfriend or boyfriend, it is 2021 after all. These people are the support base for the overt and subtle races, and it's not uncommon for them to move from accomplice to subvert and then eventually overt. That process is called radicalization, but that is a discussion for another day. They enable the racist and give them cover. They are all bonded by a dislike of the left or things that challenge the dominant group's status quo, cis straight white men, and preservation of the racial hierarchies. They show anything from mockery to apathy to utter loathing for social justice. This bunch isn't just white people. They can be black, they can be Latinx, they can be Asian, they can be anything. We live in a world affected by white supremacy for the last 500 years, and it has a lasting effect that many of the groups involved have internalized to this very day. The best way to combat racism is by knowing what it is, identifying the ways and people that support white supremacy and uphold racism. Systemic racism, or white supremacy laws, in action is systemic, but this list shows how people identify the individual racists who help propagate the system and disadvantages many people of color. White supremacy is like an onion. There are many layers, and the more you peel it back and find it out, the stinkier and insidious it is. But, we can do something about that. That's why I'm a strong proponent of CRT and education in this field. But, it is what it is. Anyway, this has been Bread Pill Black, and thank y'all for watching. Hope y'all have a good 4th of July, and peace. And if you're watching this past 4th of July, I hope y'all had a great one, and peace again.